In Greek mythology, Sisyphus was a king who, upon cheating death twice, was punished by Zeus to be forced to roll a large boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down when nearly reaching the top, making him have to start it all over again in an eternal cycle. This myth gave origin to the expression Sisyphean task, tasks that are laborious or futile. Fighting games have enjoyed their fair share of popularity over the years. Despite its highs and lows, a lot of people have been exposed to some kind of fighting game and its characters during their lives, especially during the arcade era, as even if you didn't attend an actual arcade, party and family places would generally have an arcade machine sitting in there. Curiosity got the best of kids, and now they were familiar with Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Gaio, Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Kitana, Mileena, or even Kyo, Terry, and Leona. Despite many people knowing fighting games and their characters, historically the genre has struggled with maintaining active player bases. No matter how well a fighting game sells, it's only a fairly small percentage of players that actually engage in online and competitive play. Most players mash some buttons, try an arcade mode story, and never come back to them. The reason? Learning them feels like a Sisyphean task. The barrier of entering fighting games has been a constant point of discussion among developers. Fighting games are indubitably hard to learn and get into. The commands are alien to players with no previous experience in the genre. While they become trivial in the long run, most players struggle to get used to the relatively simple motions, such as quarter circles and half circles. Charge motions? They are basically ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs written in reverse to new players. After taking the first important step of learning how the commands work, players are then overwhelmed with learning the game-specific mechanics. Again, to veteran players this is nothing, as a lot of mechanics are similar among different games. New players, however, lack that experience, and therefore have to slowly get used to these, adding another layer of complexity and time investment to learning the basics. After spending a good chunk of time learning the basics, a player might feel like he wants to see how his skills hold up. He tries to fight another player, and gets completely destroyed. Now he has two choices: leave, only playing arcade modes at best, or going deeper into the fighting game's rabbit hole, which is a much harder and much more uncomfortable choice. Now, if the player keeps going, he faces even bigger challenges. Even though modern fighting games make an effort to try to disponibilize as much knowledge about the game to players in tutorials and trials, they are often incomplete, inaccurate, or outdated. So players are encouraged to look for more information online, which again requires even more player commitment and dedication. Upon looking for the combo lists, players are instead greeted with manuscripts of an ancient civilization lost in time, called the FGC, all written in a weird language called notations. Learning the notations for the first time isn't actually that far away from learning a different language, which is yet another jump in the complexity of learning fighting games that may turn many away from them. Now, after weeks of practice, the player feels ready. He learned the basics of his character, he learned the mechanics, he practiced the combos. He even learned a little about the matchups in advance because he heard that this was important. He queues for a match, look at his opponent's character, remember what he does, formulates a plan, and gets bodied again. Much like the classic quote from Mike Tyson that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, players get humbled by the fact that no matter how much time they spend learning the game in theory, they still need to practice in real matches to actually improve. Getting better at fighting games is a trial by fire. To get the first few wins, players will get beaten up over and over again. It is not rare to hear stories about how players lost from 15 to 100 matches in a row before finally getting their measly first win. Much like learning how to walk, winning a match might not seem like a big deal after some time, but it is one of the most difficult things when starting out and a very important mark. And still, no matter how good a player may think they are at a fighting game, there will always be someone better than them. And there is someone as good or better than the person that is better than them. As time goes on, games keep evolving, and players only get even better. Fighting games are not a race, but a marathon. Players don't get good over weeks or even months. It is a process that takes years, slowly making small improvements each day that are nearly imperceptible. A lot of times players will feel like they're not even improving at all. And even so, a player who technically has years of experience can still feel like a rookie should he not keep up with the game by practicing and playing regularly. So it is understandable why getting into fighting games is a daunting task to most, and why so many prefer to just play versus the CPU and never dare to lose to other players. The dilemma that arises from these difficulties is how can developers attract and keep more players interested in going deep into fighting games? There have been different takes on how to solve this issue. One, the most simplistic of all, is the one that started with Street Fighter V. Just try to simplify everything to make the barrier of entry lower. Theoretically, this way, more players would be interested in keeping playing the game, as they wouldn't need as much dedication to get into fighting games. The results achieved by the games that adopted this approach, however, weren't as predicted. Even after going through the effort of simplifying the systems and mechanics of the games, most players still didn't feel compelled enough to get deep into fighting games, still only playing a bit against the CPU and nothing more. The reason for that is that even though simplified, the barrier of entry was still fairly high for most of the casual player base. Most players wouldn't even be able to tell what was made easier, so the change impacted the higher level of play more, which became discontent with the watered down characteristics, the lack of player expression, and feeling alienated by developers, while changing very little in regards to new player retention. It hurt the games more than it helped. Another option is a lot more nuanced, but overall better for the game in the long run. It is to create mechanics that help new players while maintaining the depth and player expression for higher levels, and investing in other punch to make the game more fun to maybe convince the more casual players to get deeper into the game. Casual and beginner players will go through the hassle of learning the complex aspects of fighting games as long as they actually like the game and the characters and are having fun. Providing easier inputs or simpler mechanics can help alleviate the harshness of the learning process. But what truly holds players is their enjoyment of the game. It could be the visuals, it could be the gameplay feeling, the music, anything. Fighting games in this sense are much unlike the other game genres. If the game is good, it keeps players interested. If removing mechanics and features was the way to go, then games such as Dota or League of Legends would in no way be as successful as they are. The new player experience for these games is actually horrible. Tutorials that don't really teach anything useful, 100 plus matchups, items and ability descriptions that new players would memorize the Bible in reverse before actually remember all of them, and still, players persevere and get into these games, purely because they enjoy something. Maybe a character, maybe the way the game is played, maybe the minigame of Type Racer located entirely inside the MOBAs, but one thing's for sure, players find a way to learn them against all odds. In regards to this, if Street Fighter V set anti-example to fighting games such as to never leave out the arcade mode out of the release build, even if you have to rush the release of your game, Street Fighter VI sets the example of how fighting games can have depth and player expression, while also having means to keep new and casual players interested. In an attempt to move away from the problems of Street Fighter V, players were given a lot more freedom and options to their characters, and the game was released not only with an arcade mode but also World Tour mode, which is a way to better connect with the casual player base. It can provide hours of content, especially to those who enjoy collecting appearances and learning moves to customize their characters. Considering that Capcom seems to be going to actively support it during Street Fighter VI lifecycle, this might be a glimpse of the future of fighting games. Well, not exactly this. I meant the sandbox-style game mode. Anyway, moving on. Regardless of the approach that devs might take to try to solve the issue of accessibility in fighting games, it seems like the conclusion is always the same. Not all players are interested in going deep into the genre, because regardless of the barrier of entry, players will go crazy over trying to become the best of a game. And there is no stopping that. Sakurai tried to make Smash a series as casual as possible, with no intention of making it competitive. And look how it turned out! Players will always find a way to step up the game, and most people are not willing to try to keep up. The reality that devs have to accept is that on one hand, you have Daigo practicing the same motion for 1 hour non-stop, and on the other, you have Lil Timmy, who will maybe play 3 arcade runs a day and be done with it. He has no intention of becoming the next evil champion, and will probably keep mashing buttons for a long time. And that's fine. There's no need to try to turn Timmy into the best player ever. All that is needed is to make the game as interesting as possible, so he feels like buying the Ultra Ultimate Unlimited Super Turbo Hyper Extreme Special Arcade Champion Reload Steam Edition 2 of the game. Developers have to embrace the idea that the genre is niche, and that whether they like it or not, players will always find a way to complicate things, and there's no winning against the players. Well, at least as long as devs want their games to thrive. So to players this means, you just gotta take it on the chin, because if they really like the game they're playing, they will just put up with this and overcome it. The only way for this uphill battle to not feel futile is liking what you're doing. Maybe it's masochism, or maybe it is just pure love for a game. If Albert Camus concludes in the myth of Sisyphus that like Sisyphus, humanity must accept the struggle and absurdity of life and not expect much to find happiness, then, in fighting games, as a small part of entertainment inside the cycle, a player must come in terms with the harsh learning curve and not expect much to enjoy it and have some fun. The struggle towards improvement is enough to fill a man's heart. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.